Welcome back to your favorite kind of your neighbor does the game dev thing, coming at you not live, but pre-recorded and heavily edited. I come bearing juicy fruits of my labor, with the latest updates on my game dev project. In case you're new, this is my toy platformer that has been in sporadic development for a little while at this point, which I've been giving a lot more love recently. If you want to see how we got it to here, from nothing, I shall direct your peepers to the previous devlog. I will forewarn you, we are not building the next Minecraft, and we're not really searching for the new top 5 game dev things you need to stop doing lest you burn in hell for millennia to come. This is just me, a grand team of 1, working on a project to learn something, and frankly just because I like the process. If I make questionable choices, it's probably because a better way hasn't yet occurred to me. Today on the docket, we have cool things, we have fool things. We are going to be waxing poetically about how adding a healing mechanic invokes deep existential dread in my cranium. We'll also build a simple debugging tool and implement the final answer to the question of life. As with many things in life, a lot of game dev is taking care of the mundane, the relatively boring stuff, the uninteresting work. Prototype this, throw away that, find and fix a small bug that happens under some specific condition and at no other point. The proverbial second 80% of the work that needs to be done after the first 80 is complete. A lot of this work requires seeing what's happening under the hood, the variables flipping back and forth, references being set, and just in general observing the state that is not immediately visible in game. Until recently, I had no really good solution for how to do that. What I've been doing was this truly perverse workaround that I've seen other Unity enthusiasts also go through, marching forth on an endless crusade of serializing script fields just so they show up in the editor. Needless to say, this is an unwieldy caveman-style debugging tactic. Chief among its limitations is the fact that it only really lets you see a very simple set of information. Whichever classes Unity already knows how to display in its editor UI is all you're gonna be able to see. It also doesn't let you view the info from many game objects at once. You have to physically click out of the game, select the object you care about, and click back in. That's clunky. You lose a lot of time precision with that. And as crude as this approach is, it is genuinely helpful, and it requires very little of a precious resource called thinking. So I made it work for a while. But we are now getting to the point when scripts are growing bigger and interactions between the objects are becoming more complex, making this a textbook example of do it poorly first, and then, when you know better, do it better. And better we will do it by implementing a debug menu. In its basic form, this menu is little else than a dense text display that sources a bunch of information from the game. There are just 2 things to consider. How are we going to be getting the info from the game components? And which game components do we even care about? I do not know the answer to the latter, and that influences my thoughts on the former. Let's split the idea of sourcing and drawing the debug data into 2 separate scripts: the container and the renderer. We can then make each component that wants to be visible register itself into the container and just let the renderer worry about how to display all of the info that the container provides. This is your typical separation of concerns, which you should feel especially at home with if you do any front-end work. In practice, it looks something like this. The debug text container is the class that keeps tabs on all of the data providers, and the debug text renderer is responsible for displaying them. The container is a singleton offering only 2 methods to the rest of the world, one for registering a new provider, another for deregistering. The provider itself is just a method that returns a string. This is awfully convenient. If I'm working on some new bit of the game, regardless of where I am, I can just slap together a function and get whatever internal info I care about straight onto the screen, with the data refreshing in real time, no less. And when it no longer becomes possible to provide the info, like for example when we delete the game object that the provider is registered from, the provider can also be cleanly deregistered. And since Unity's text component supports some simple markup, we can also make use of colors, so everything is just a tiny little bit easier to parse. Now, I hear you screaming, my fellow computer science majors. Interpolating a bunch of strings on each game tick is slow and expensive, and there are no guards for just how clapped the provider functions can get. Well, let me calm your quivering minds with the best kind of counter-argument. You're right. I also don't care. The amount of info I need to display at once isn't significant enough to warrant a more performant solution here. After piloting this system for a bit, a problem cropped up. There's just too much info to render at the same time. I could go the Minecraft route and just cram more text on the screen, but even the current text on the side is fairly distracting. The initial solution that came to me was pagination. If I can't draw everything at the same time, let's just split it into chunks and let you flip through them. And as I was adding that feature in, I thought, well, what if the pages actually meant something? Then I could introduce some meaningful structure into the system for free. Thus we arrive at the idea of tabs. When a provider is registered, it also says which tab it wants to go in. It could go into Player, World, UI, Console, or System. Meaning of each is hopefully self-evident. This idea can also grow easily. If I want to add another tab, I just expand this edom over here and the rest is just handled by itself by the code. I also left a little switch for drawing everything at the same time. But I'll be the first to admit it's not as useful as I had hoped. The intent was to let me see info from different tabs simultaneously, thus solving the problem of cross-referencing game objects. But this is not the right way to go about this. I have a better solution in mind. Introducing a special Favorites tab. You would go into the debug menu, mark which individual providers you care about, and then this Favorites tab would only show the marked ones. The marks could also be persisted in between game restarts, so you wouldn't have to remark everything constantly. To be fair, haven't gotten around to implementing this yet. The need for such a feature just isn't strong enough so far. I only occasionally need to cross-reference stuff. And, having dusted off some rudimentary UI skills, I quickly threw together a pause menu. It's not really worth covering in details. We just manipulate Unity's timescale to pause whatever is happening and reroute some inputs. The main reason for this was actually to play around with an options menu and to learn a little bit about how to reconfigure basic graphics settings. But that foray is still a work in progress, so let us get back to that at a later point. Having made a thing that lets me make other things better and faster, we can move on to actual development. One of the features that I've been very eager to cover is my approach to a save system. Outside of some older arcade titles, you expect games to keep track of what you do. You can play any game that's out now, turn it off, go do something else, and when you come back, you expect it to pick back up as if no time had passed. This is basic functionality that you implicitly expect to work. However, our little toy platformer doesn't know how to do that yet. If you close it, everything is gone and you need to start over the next time you boot it up. But thanks to some design choices made earlier, teaching it to do that will not be difficult. All actions we take in the game fall into two categories: those with some consequence for the game world and those with none. Hitting a checkpoint, defeating a boss, grabbing its loot, turning a lever to unlock a shortcut, these all fall under the
Yes, hello game, please, I did a thing, note this down for later, thanks.
And thankfully, these are the minority in the space of all actions you can take in a video game. One little notepad is all that we need to keep track of just a handful of important things, and everything else can be reconstructed on the fly. The aforementioned clever design choice we made is our game state cache, which we built previously to save info in between room reloads. It already takes care of jotting down that something important has happened in the world, and of knowing what even is important. It can do that because it is built with the same core principle as the debug text container, to simply offload the decision of what's important to the data providers, and to only take responsibility of storing whatever it is asked to store. Therefore, to implement a save system, we just need to teach the game state cache to read from and write to a file on your disk. The way our data is laid out, there are 3 pieces of information we need to store for each cache entry: the ID, the stored data, and the type of the stored data. As long as we know these things, we are free to move between a file and our in-memory representation as we wish. One quality I wanted my save files to have, at least for now, is being human readable. I wanted to be able to open the save file in a text editor, make some sense of what I saw, and even be able to modify it at my will. This stems from the same desire that gave birth to the glorious debug menu. I want control over what's happening in the game so that I can force it into the states that I need for development. What this means practically is that the game data should be stored as a readable string. I also wasn't too keen on writing my own serializer and parser, so any existing solutions were welcome. Like a shimmering rocket beaming across the sky, Jason came to rescue. The spec is simple, the parsers are plenty, and Unity already provides one, which is the most important part. The initial draft of the structure was something like this. It turned out that this was annoying to work with, specifically because it turned out that the Unity JSON serializer doesn't work with dictionaries. The data in the cache is neatly packaged, and I know that each entry is guaranteed exactly 3 pieces of data. This lets it lay very naturally in a table-like format, so I decided that a trusty old TSV will do the trick. Thus, JSON becomes the format for the data itself, and the TSV for the metadata around it. And with this, we can actually get rid of JSON entirely in favor of some other more efficient format. This is intentional. Translating to and from readable text is an expensive task for the computer, as strings are a notoriously terrible data storage format. While the amount of data we store right now is laughable, it may become a noticeable concern in larger volumes, making the game loading slow. And who doesn't like their game to load crazy fast, right? Performance is a feature, and so keeping an easy way out of possible issues for the future might just save our asses later. Side note, Unity's JSON serializer works best with plain data objects only. Public fields for everything that gets serialized, no other fuss. I quite like this. It forces you to clarify your ideas about what each game component needs to really keep track of. With writing to disk done, we just need to implement the inverse. This is simple. Open the file, read it line by line, throw the reinterpreted data back into our cache. There is one minor complication. The order in which game components get initialized is unknown. So it is possible for something to try reading its data before cache is done loading the save file, and fail both miserably and, which is worse, probably silently. This is a classic race condition. To alleviate this, I just added this little indicator of whether the cache is ready. The downstream components that depend on the cache can block their respective start methods on it, thus guaranteeing that I don't get access to everything too soon. Not perfect. I'm the one responsible for keeping all of those access checks in place, and this solution also limits me to having to use the coroutine flavor of start methods, but it'll do for now. With this little caveat out of the way, here's what this looks like. We kill some enemies, killed the game, booted back up, and they don't come back. Flashy? Not necessarily, but this marks a considerable step for the project. With a small modification to allow you to choose which save file to load, we essentially have the whole question of saving the game resolved. And now we immediately jump onto the next feature, the ultimate solution to the question of living. Dying is a simple concept in game, and as you will see, it just builds on top of 2 other features we already have. The cache that we've talked a lot about already, and the room switching mechanism. If you think about it, for the player to die is essentially to just be teleported to the last checkpoint and to have some bits of the world reset. Because we are going to consider things like NPCs, shops, levers, a one and done kind of thing, the only thing we really need to reset are the enemies that we have killed and the resources that the player has collected, which at this point amounts to HP and money. This naturally brings up the fact that we need checkpoints or save rooms, which we don't have. This is a trivial problem, which we will fix in 30 minutes tops. There it is in all of its dev asset glory. The object is just a sprite with a trigger collider. It checks if the player is close enough to it and lets them rest by pressing a button. Now that we have the object in the world, we can latch logic onto it. The player's health controller gets pinged with a gentle reminder to heal the player, as does the game state cache, getting a
"This is not a drill. The player has rested. I repeat, the player has rested."
before dropping tactical liberation onto all of the enemy killed data entries. We also jot down which checkpoints the player has rested at, so that we know where to send them when they die. From here, dying is as simple as 1, 2, 3. On reaching 0 HP, the player gets warped to the checkpoint and the world resets by resting, all hidden under a convenient blackout of the screen. The next feature that we will shamelessly yank from Dark Souls are graves, or bloodstains as they are called over there. Since we don't lose much of anything when dying in terms of progress, we want some sort of a punishment on top of being sent to the last checkpoint. Dark Souls solves this by dropping your money wherever it was when you last died. And if you die again, the previously dropped money disappears permanently. This is a fun mechanic that I love, that has also been proven a whole bunch of times already in exploration first action games. It can be extended in a bunch of ways, and it's also pretty straightforward. Let's break it down. What do we need to keep track of? First, is there a grave somewhere? Second, if so, where is it? Which room, and where specifically inside that room? And finally, what is stored inside the grave? All of these can just be bundled up next to our death-related logic, which is all being handled by the player health controller. There, we can write some code that spawns the grave wherever necessary and clears the relevant info when it gets picked up. The former also conveniently latches onto an event that we emit whenever we enter into a new room. One additional note over here is about the way the position of the grave is chosen. When you think about it for a moment, we definitely don't want to spawn the grave at your exact place of death. If you were to, for example, die by falling down a bottomless pit, there would be no way for you to pick up your grave without taking damage after coming back to that same room. A much better alternative is to put the grave on whatever the last respawn point for the current room was, because you are guaranteed to be able to get there without, any sacrifices being made. And now that death actually means something, it turns out that having 5 health really isn't that much when traveling even through this small chunk of the world that is already in place. We're just too squishy to feel comfortable exploring the world for a reasonable period of time. So, let's talk about healing. Is what I would say, but we need to talk philosophy first. Up until now, we have been treating a lot of these mechanics as prototypes. We're not actually making a game, we're just making a thing that pretends to be a real game to learn how to do this or that and figure out some solution to a bunch of game dev questions. This mindset has actually been wonderful so far. By denying the idea that you're working on a game, you liberate yourself from the pressure of creating a product. And it also lets your imagination chill for a little bit, since there is no point imagining the vast world and numerous NPCs, bosses, and features that we could still add onto our project. In focusing on making a vertical slice of what makes a game, we let go of the horizontal things, the content that sprawls outwards. And so we radically cull the scope creep, the thing that kills many projects. And yet, at this point, the mechanics we are working on start to brush against the question of designing a game more often than programming a game. Healing is just such a question. We can implement it in many ways, and all of these ways are, practically speaking, equivalently trivial to add. We could have a healing only be possible on checkpoints, or we can have enemies drop health restoring pickups, or we can have a consumable like the grasses from Demon Souls, or a replenishable health potion like in its successors. The problem is the choice itself, as this choice changes the way the game wants you to play. If we were to forbid player healing outright, or to vastly limit it, we would inch closer towards the way horror games feel. You, as a player, become more fragile, more beholden to the way the game world treats you. In Deny Recovery, each mistake burdens you more as it carries more consequence. A consumable healing is much more forgiving in comparison, but it invites grinding. An Estes system is even more forgiving. It essentially lets you walk around with mini checkpoints in your pocket, but it still ties you to your main checkpoint. If you do something like Hollow Knight, you untie the player from checkpoints altogether and let them wander the world relatively unencumbered, but your checkpoints lose a bit of their weight in the world. And by the way, Hollow Knight solved this by adding the mapping mechanic that it has. So, how does the player heal? To answer that, we suddenly brush against the question of how do I want the player to feel when playing this? And this is a much harder question to answer, because by nature of this being a toy project, I had till now shoveled a lot of the considerations to the side. And yet, we want to get a satisfying answer. Even as a toy, this project has already accumulated a lot of choices that collectively pull it towards being a certain kind of experience. It can never be a first-person shooter. It's a 2D platformer. It's a single world split into rooms. It has autosave with permanent consequences. It doesn't provide high-octane action. It wants to be more slow-paced and methodical, a more relaxed experience than Ultrakill, for example. Something you haven't seen yet is that this project already has a complete minimap system, which makes it invite exploration of the world even more. Each subsequent edition crystallizes it more and more. Both the good and the bad choices make it clear what was already working well and what wasn't. And you don't pay for this process with just your time and effort. You pay by giving up the maybes, the potential of alternative routes that your project could have gone down, but that it now will not. Being successful in this exchange of potential for actual is kind of the ultimate creative goal. I would have loved to tell you that I have a clear solution for this whole philosophical conundrum, but I don't. A creative process is, in its purer form, a process of exploration. I can tell you, however, what I have figured out with this project so far. The way that it is already shaping up to be, and what I am sure you have already kind of sussed out from the way that I've talked about it, is I am pulling the game loop more towards exploration of the world. The goal is for the player to be interfacing with the environment as much as possible. I don't want this to become a number crunching game, nor an RPG. I don't really want any of those mechanics here. I also don't want to put undue stress on the player or make them excessively fragile. I feel like that would take away from the whimsy of exploration that I really want to foster. So we will not go with consumables, nor we will go with no healing at all approach. For now, we'll just use the regular Estes system with flasks resetting at a checkpoint. This is something that is fairly easy to expand, adding options to reward exploration, and it also allows for the expedition style exploring, where you leave your cozy home base towards the unknown and return to it periodically to recover. We're exploring a different format. Upon letting the whole idea of video devlogs marinate in my brain and seeing the reception to the first one, I decided that I quite like this format and want to explore it further. At the same time, heavy editing and long runtime are difficult to reconcile with, working on the project itself, so I am checking if this 20-ish minute format is a better fit. There is more to talk about, but as I was writing the script out, I realized that it became even longer than the one for the first video, and as that one gentleman once wrote, sorry, I didn't have the time to write something shorter. There's a whole minimap system that is already implemented, which is very interesting and definitely worth discussing in detail. I have also implemented a main menu whilst working on this video, and uncovered a whole bunch of fun that could be had with how to initialize and destroy all the game components over there. The project is now also entering the in-between limbo, where it's getting close to be feature complete, quote-unquote, from the standpoint of what makes a platformer a recognizable platformer. There is less and less of the vertical stuff to figure out. Off the top of my head, the interactive elements, item pickups, and rudimentary NPC interactions, dialogues and shops, are all that is left. Everything else, the enemy design, the world, the content, are bits of the horizontal part of the game, the meat on the bones rather than the bones themselves. And that means that we now have a really cool toy to play with. We can build a game on top of this. Not quite yet, but it's definitely inching closer. So, again, thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more updates. And all of that yiddle yaddle. Yiddle yaddle? The hell is yiddle yaddle? No, there is a sound. The world outside exists, and I am a part of it against my will. Forefathers bear witness. I am the lord of all of the shit writing. Let me realign my heavy blanket that absorbs all echoes, that also absorbs my heat, that also does not let the hot air, which is over here, escape, thus slowly boiling me alive as the metaphorical frog. Jesus, my poor PC is gonna combust.